We've been reading through this passage for the past couple of weeks. While you're looking for that one, actually, I want to take just a moment and do something I don't do very often, and that's talk to the people who are going to be watching this message later on this week, because you might be sitting there, some of you who know me better are going to be sitting there going, why is he wearing pink? Because I'm going to tell all of you, I have not worn a pink shirt in my entire life, which, D, I want you to know this shows how much that we love you, that I have this shirt on. But for those of you who aren't here this morning, who might be listening later on this week, I actually tell you this to invite you to pray with us, that our administrative assistant, Deanna Kuntz, which I'm pointing over here as if you can see her, you can't, that's perfectly fine. But she's going in for multiple myeloma stem cell treatment beginning tomorrow, well, not beginning tomorrow, but the stem cell part of it tomorrow, and we had a great time of prayer over her. And so we would invite you to continue to pray with us, and all of you in the room, we would invite you to continue to pray throughout the course of the next several weeks as its surgery, as its recovery, the next several months as the recovery continues on. And this actually hit me about halfway through the week that the pink is generally the breast cancer awareness color, and that's not what this is. But pink is a color, if you know Dee, that she is absolutely obsessed with. So that's why we went with pink this morning. If you go into her office, she has a pink wall, and I can't tell you how many times she has thanked me for allowing her to paint a wall pink in her office. So that's why we're here, to show our support. But please, don't let it stop by wearing pink on Sunday morning. Continue to pray. Continue to pray over them. Continue to pray as a body. We know that they're not the only ones going through things this morning. And so we would ask you to continue to pray for all who are part of the body, and for those outside the body. Ephesians chapter 4. I gave you some time now. If you're going to turn to it, you've probably made it there by now. Therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, this is Paul writing, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, and living through all. However, He has given each one of us a special gift through the generosity of Christ. That is why the scriptures say, when He ascended to the heights, He led a crowd of captives and gave gifts to His people. Notice that it says He ascended. This clearly means that Christ also descended to our lowly world. And the same one who descended is the one who ascended higher than all the heavens, so that He might fill the entire universe with Himself. Now these are the gifts that Christ gave to the church, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastors and teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do His work and build up the church, the body of Christ. This will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever that they sound like the truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of His body, the church. He makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. Now again, like I've mentioned the past couple of weeks, I realize that's a lot. That's 16 verses, and I've talked with some who would say never read more than 2 to 3 verses in a row because you'll lose people. But in order to fully grasp what it is that is in this book, we have to read more than our 2 to 3 verses sometimes. We have to memorize more than our 2 to 3 verses. We have to discover what is in this book. This book, if we're being completely honest, is probably one of the most misinterpreted and abused books of all time. If we look at the history of the church, if we look at the history of the world, the words that are written in this book have been used against people in ways that they were never intended to be used. At the time that Jesus came and he was physically walking on the earth, that was one of the big hangups that he had with the Pharisees, is that they were using this book, this truth, to abuse the Israelites and the Jewish people, to try and get them to do things that were never the intention of what was in this book. And he gave instruction. And for the past 2,000 years, we have continued to make the same mistake. We have continued to try and get people to do things and believe things that weren't actually in this book. But we believe here, or at least I can at the very least say that I believe, this book contains truth. This book is full of truth. Nothing in it is false. I'm not saying this book is the truth, but I'm saying it contains the truth. And just because we have misinterpreted and abused truth does not change what truth is. It does not change the reality of it. It does not change the power of truth just because we have failed it at times. And so we dig in, and we sometimes read more than a verse or 2 verses or 3 verses so that we can grasp the entire context of what is going on in the verses that we're reading. The verse that we are really digging into right now, however, is the verse that we quote so often, where it says that we are supposed to speak the truth in love. I believe those words to be true. I believe that we are supposed to speak the truth, and we are supposed to do it in love. However, with the abuse that has happened to the truth over the years, with sometimes our own inattentiveness to the truth, possibly our own laziness, but sometimes just our own misinterpretation of it, we get confused as to what the truth is. Sometimes we get to a point where we haven't actually spent the time discovering what truth is to be able to communicate truth to others. We live in a world where being canceled is a big thing. It's all over the news. You've probably heard the word at some point. And when we say canceled, we're talking about how somebody said something that other people didn't like, and so they canceled them. And so we run in fear many times in the church that if we say the wrong thing, then we will be canceled. If you get on social media and you say the wrong thing, you'll be canceled. If you're having a conversation with somebody, you'll be canceled in that relationship that you're having with them. And so we tend to complain in the church that we're being canceled, that we're being pushed out, that we're being persecuted, that our voice doesn't matter anymore. And as I read through this and as we have our discussions over the next several weeks, I've started to ask the question, is some of the reason that we're being canceled and we are being pushed out because we really don't have anything to say? It's not necessarily that nobody is willing to listen to the truth. It's that we don't even know what the truth is and how to communicate that truth. Now, we say things like this, speak the truth in love, but we don't know where the truth starts, and we don't know how to do it in love and how those things come together. And so we have chosen to just not say anything. People say the world is being taken over by all these other voices and all of these other ideas, and the church has become silent because it's been canceled. I wonder if the church has become silent because the church just became silent, because it didn't know what to say in the first place. I mean, I've sat there in conversations, and I've been sitting there thinking, I don't agree with this person that's talking to me, but I don't have enough background to what I'm saying to be willing to open up my mouth and to say anything. It can be scary. It can be like, if I open my mouth, this person might have actually put in more effort into their beliefs than I put into my beliefs. And so we become quiet. I am asked consistently, I wouldn't say constantly, but consistently, questions about some of the big things that are going on in the world around us. I'm asked, what is your belief, or they'll use the word stance, but what is your belief or your stance on the LGBTQIA plus issues that are in our world that we have right now? What are your beliefs? What is your stance on abortion? What is your belief? What is your stance on many of the political things that are going on in the world we live in? And then I'll also be asked things like, what is your belief and your stance on the existence of God, the goodness of God, the return of Jesus, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, why it's going to happen? What is your belief on the resurrection? I'll be asked all of those things. What I will typically do in those conversations is I'll actually start by, I think it's something Jesus did, so I feel like I'm following a pretty good example here. But many times, I'll answer the question by starting with some questions of my own. And I'll ask them, can I ask why it is that you're asking those questions today? And sometimes it's because it's something that is really involved in their family. There's somebody in their family who's wrestling with some of those things that they're asking about. Or sometimes it's they're wrestling with those things. Sometimes, if they're being more honest in that moment, and I'm not saying everybody has this mentality, but some are willing to say, because I want to prove to you that you're wrong. Because I have an idea what you believe, and I want to show you that you're wrong. Some people are willing to admit that that's why I'm coming at this. There are people who are genuinely curious, and they just want to know what it is that you believe. None of them are bad answers. I just want to know where we're starting this conversation. And I may ask them, can I ask what it is that you believe about these things? Because that gives us, and it's not to trap them and so that I can get my rebuttal ready and I can prove to them why they're wrong or anything like that. It's so that I can figure out where's the baseline in this conversation. Where are we both starting from in here? But I'll begin my answer with a question. And so this morning, as we read through once again Ephesians chapter 4, and we come across that verse where it says to speak the truth in love. And some of you may be sitting there wondering, well, what do you believe about all of those things that you just mentioned? What is your stance? What is the Church of God's stance on all of those things that you just mentioned? I'm going to back it up a little bit, and I'm going to ask you this morning, what do you believe about those things? Now, as you walked in, hopefully you received a little brown notebook. It looks kind of like this. If you didn't receive one of those, if you would put your hand in the air, I didn't actually peg anybody to do this, but would somebody, Courtney's heading back. Somebody will run around and they will give you one of these if you hold your hand up in the air until they get there. And then you're going to use these in just a little bit. I'm going to ask you this morning 3 questions. And I'm not asking these questions rhetorically. I'm asking you these questions so that you can actually answer these questions. I'm not going to ask you to come up on the platform and to give your answer so that everybody can hear, or stand up where you are and give your answer to everybody can hear. I'm going to ask you to write it down in this book in just a little bit. I'm going to walk through with you what those questions are that I'm asking you to answer this morning, and I'm going to walk through why I'm asking you to answer those questions. And then we're going to give you some time before we leave here this morning to write down your answers in this little book. So that was just, as I was talking to the staff about this, they said, hey, you should probably let people know what you're doing beforehand, or they're going to be freaking out thinking that you're going to ask them to go up there on the platform and give all their answers to everybody. So that was to give you a little bit of peace about what it is that we're going to talk about. But the first question that I would, and I'll have these on the screen here at the end as well. So if you want to write them down, write them down. You should find some pins on those little, in front of you on the back of the pews. Thank you to the gentlemen who helped build those things. I believe Doug was part of that, and Rick was part of that, and Steve Swanson was part of that. And they came in, they installed them, they look great. And we can also, when I ask you to write things down, you actually have something to write them down with, so that helps a lot. What do you believe is true about truth? That's the first question. Now, I thought about giving you a whole bunch of different topics, like what do you believe about God's existence? What do you believe about God's goodness? What do you believe about all these big topics that we have today? But I want us to start very simply with, well, not simply. It's actually not simple at all, and it's simple at the same time. What do you believe is true about truth? Now, there are some who would say that they believe that there is an absolute truth. And that truth is found in this book that we have right here, and that truth is found in a relationship with Jesus Christ and the power of His Spirit that flows through us. There are some who would say that's where truth comes from, that's what truth is. There are some who would say that truth is relative to who you are, and what's true for you, it might not be true for me. It depends on the circumstances, it depends on the person. It depends on what God or some other being or just biology has put inside of you. That truth is, we use the word relative or subjective, or it's objective. All of these different things that you may believe about what is true about truth. But if we're going to go out and we're going to do as Paul said in Ephesians chapter 4, and we're going to speak the truth in love, we have to, I believe, first understand what we believe about truth in the first place. So that when somebody looks at us and says, well, I get that that's true for you, but that's not true for me, we have a base point for our conversation because we know where truth came from in the first place. Now, what I don't want you to do is to write down what you think you're supposed to write down because you're sitting in a church right now. I want you to write down what you actually believe to be true about truth. Where does it come from? How do you figure it out? All those things. What do you believe is true about truth? We read a few weeks ago on Easter Sunday a verse that, and I'm going to speed up here a little bit because I want you guys to have time to actually answer these questions, to participate and not just spectate. But in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul writes, if Christ has not been raised, then all our preaching is useless and your faith is useless. So if none of this is true, then it's all useless. What do you believe is true about truth itself? The second question I'm going to ask you to answer is why do you believe that's true? Why do you believe it's true? In 1 Peter 3:15, we read these words that if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be able to explain it to them. Always be ready to give them an answer. Now, for some, they believe what they believe. You believe what you believe because it's what Fox News or CNN told you that you were supposed to believe. For some, you believe it because a trusted individual in your life told you that this is where truth comes from and this is what is true. Maybe it was a parent, a grandparent, maybe it was a pastor, a youth pastor, a children's pastor. I mean, the list could go on and on and on as to who that trusted person might have been. For some of you, it's going to be because this is something that I've experienced in my life. And I have evidence that backs up why I believe what I believe about truth and its source and all those things. I don't know what your reason is, but why do you believe what you believe about truth? Because that topic will come up if you're actually willing to express the truth in love, to communicate the truth in love. Eventually, in some way or another, that question will be asked. But whichever issue it is that you're talking about, whichever topic you're talking about, eventually somebody will ask you, why do you believe it? And if your response is, I don't know, then you're not going to help them very far down the field. You're not going to be pointing them very closely to Jesus if your answer is, I don't know. I'm not going to feed more into that because you're going to start being like, well, I can't write down that answer and I can't write down that answer. So I'm going to stop right there. Maybe your answer is, I don't know. And that's okay to write that down this morning. We're going to keep moving forward over the coming weeks. The third question that I'm going to ask you to answer this morning is, how does your life reflect that truth? How does your life reflect what you believe to be true about truth? Because it will. If you believe that truth is subjective and truth is for the individual, then you're going to live a certain way. If you believe that truth comes directly from God himself, then you're going to believe a certain way. And I know that we can make the arguments in church that it's not about our actions. People shouldn't be judging us. People shouldn't be looking at us anyway. But I believe, anyway, that the truth in this book shows us that our actions will reveal what we believe. They are connected. That you can't say one thing and do something else and still say that that's what you believe. In James 1:22, the brother of Jesus writes, don't just listen to God's word, you must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. If you don't do what it is that you say that you believe, then you're only fooling yourself. You're not fooling God, and you're not fooling the other people around you. And that's why, as you're answering these questions, I encourage you, answer them honestly. You're the only one that's going to read this, other than God. I guess he knows what you're writing down. And if you share it with somebody, I suppose they would know too, but that's your choice. But there's no point in lying when there's not other people who are going to be grading this when it's over. Be honest. How does your life, how would somebody look at you and say, I can tell what they believe about truth. I can tell what they believe because I see XYZ in their life. And you might have to say, those things that I say that I believe, nobody would look at my life and think that's what I actually believe. Some of us have to admit that. There are areas of my life where I have to be honest and say, if people looked at that, they wouldn't think that's what I believe. Jesus told us in Matthew 22:37, he was asked the question of what is the greatest commandment? And his response, the first part of his response is that you are to love the Lord your God with all. That's the beginning of the response. You are to love the Lord your God with all. I'm going to give you this one story, and then I'm going to get out of here so that you can start writing. I want you to picture, actually, this is perfect timing, because Jamie, didn't you just tell me that Colt got a turkey this morning, right? Chance got a turkey. See, I was right the first time. Chance got a turkey this morning. Chance didn't use his whole body to get that turkey. If you've ever been hunting, now, yes, he had to walk out to where he was hunting, so he used his whole body in that point. But I'm assuming he shot it with a gun, or was it bow and arrow? Gun? Okay. It took his finger. I suppose you could say it took his eye too, because he had to look through it. But it took his finger to actually pull off the kill shot. That's not what God is calling out of us. He's not asking us just to use this one tiny piece of who you are. He's asking us to use all you are. When a lion goes out to hunt, I'm stealing this from a guy named Os Guinness. You can go look it up. He tells the story probably better than I do. But when a lion goes out to hunt, if you've ever watched this on a Discovery Channel or anything, or maybe you've seen it in the safari, all of its being is involved in that hunt. If you've watched the videos of that, it crouches down, it's hiding in the bush or wherever it is, and that prey comes by, and it doesn't just reach out with a paw and take down its prey. All of its being is a part of pouncing on that prey. Every piece, it uses its mouth, it uses its haunches, it uses its claws. Its heart is probably racing. I don't know. I've never checked it out. Every muscle that's a part of that animal is involved in hunting that prey. And when Jesus says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all, he's not asking us to approach it like we're hunting a turkey as a human with a gun or even a bow. He's saying approach this like a lion hunting prey, that all of your body, all of your soul, all of your mind is a part of loving the Lord your God. Which means that when people look at us, when God looks at us, they should see evidence of what it is that we believe. So those are your questions. What do I believe is true about truth? And I think this should be up on a slide for you so you don't have to remember them all. Why do you believe it? And how does your life reflect it? Now, I would love to say we're going to take the next half hour and you're just going to write down those answers. I'm not going to ask you to hang around for the next half hour, although you can if you want to. We're not going to kick you out of here. But I am going to ask you to take the next 5 minutes and to just write down the answers to those questions. And to go home today and to continue to think on the answers to those questions. Because if we are going to communicate the truth in love, we need to understand what it is that we believe to be true. And I know that the temptation can be there, but Justin, that's why we come in here, so that you teach us what's true. And we have those discussions. There's teaching involved in those. But you need to know what you believe to be true about truth. And if you're sitting there and you're struggling, hey, it's a great time to grab one of those sparring partners that we talked about last week. That's a great time I'd love to sit down with you and just talk through things. You don't have to do this all by yourself, but this morning, I'm inviting you to at least begin answering those questions. You can do it in your seats. You can come to the altars, and you can have that conversation with God here. As far as, God, this is what I believe about truth, and this is why, and this is how I believe that my life reflects it. Take these moments this morning to not just spectate, but to participate in your faith, in your walk with Him. The worship team will come back up after a little while. You can continue writing all the way through that song. You can continue writing after everybody else has left this room. Or you can join, you can stand next several minutes and answer those questions. If you need a pen, raise your hand up high. If you still didn't get a book, raise your hand up high. We'll get you a book. If you need to grab a sparring partner, grab one. Whatever you need to do to answer those three questions. Brennan Manning is one made famous for this quote, that the single greatest cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door and get on with their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. Church, if we believe those words that we just sang, we cannot leave this room and go on as if none of it matters, and go on as if we don't believe it. We cannot leave this room and just blend into the world around us, but we are called to be different from the world around us if we believe those words. If we believe those words that are in the scriptures that we read in this room, then we must leave this room and live out those scriptures. And so as you leave today, we don't leave today and get on with our lifestyles that we had all week long. We leave today getting on by the lifestyle that Jesus Christ has called us to live. And we go out and we spread the truth of His love and His grace and His mercy with the world that is all around us, the world that is in desperate need of all of that. And so I charge you this morning with a charge that came from Jesus Himself, to go into all the world and to make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Church, we go to walk humbly together with Jesus this week. Have a great week, and I can't wait to hear the stories of how God has used you as you walk with Him this week. It has been awesome worshiping with you this morning. Don't stop worshiping this week.